Okay. Hi, Bruce. How are you?
Saurabh, great to see you. I'm doing well here in Canada. How are you doing in India?
Great. We are good. We are good. Very good. Locked. Just locked. It's never been in history that I have not traveled for so long. So that's only not so good thing. But
You
otherwise,
must
it's good.
you must have very itchy feet right now to get out there and do something.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So it's been quite some time I have traveled, but otherwise, it's good. I mean, I'm learning new things and doing. So how is it in your place?
It's quite a bit different here because it's very rural where I live, and I have great access to hiking trails and lots of
Wow.
land here and lots of wildlife around. Foxes
Okay.
walk across the property, all kinds of
Wow.
birds.
Wow.
So it really
That's
has
great.
not had a tremendous impact. And because I'm retired and I don't have to go into work, I don't have to depend upon that income. It's
Right.
great.
Good, and I think it's a hard time for people who are working, but otherwise, for other people, I think it is not so good. But that's great actually. That's great. Good. So I'm just quickly going to run through your pictures, and then we are going to start. Maybe I'll start asking you question and answers, and then we'll come back to the pictures, and you are going to tell me how you shot them. Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. And we have Suman also joined us, and he's saying hi to both of us. Okay.
The landscape here, Saurabh, is going to look very different than in some cases in what you're used to seeing in India, and especially an owl like
Right.
this in a heavy snowfall.
Right. Beautiful. Beautiful. Uh, I so much love to see your pictures on Instagram. They are so good.
Oh, thank you.
They're very inspiring. So we both appreciate your pictures a lot. Really a lot. Beautiful.
A, a lot of hours, Saurabh. I can assure you, a lot of hours into chasing some of those birds and sitting and waiting and a tremendous number of hours just waiting.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, what you're seeing here, actually, and what I sent you, and it's interesting because in some of your other interviews, your other guests were focused in some cases on a single genre, bird
Uh-huh. Right.
photography, for example. And I
Right.
don't put myself in that category at all. And I
Okay.
know there's a very good photographer in Scotland that I'd spent some time with, and he was really
Okay.
trying to hammer home that, to be a professional photographer, you need to find a niche in order to
Mm-hmm.
sell your work.
Right.
And I'm not in that position. I'm not trying to generate income from this work.
Right.
And
Right.
I like what I like. And therefore, I have not developed a singular niche at all for my work. And so what you're seeing here is quite a range from wildlife photography to
Right.
landscapes to street photography. And of
Right.
course, some of it involves international travel as well.
Right. 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 Good. So great. So I'm just going to just go through the questions. So Bruce, tell us a little bit about how you started your journey, life journey of photography so far.
Well, it started a very long time ago, I'm afraid to say. And it's a reflection of my age. I was actually in high school and I became interested, and there was a photo club that started up. And I went to a very small rural high school in Ontario, eastern part of Ontario in Canada,
Okay.
and it was quite unique to have a darkroom built. And so I was
Okay.
very interested. And this is back in the early 70s. And so
Okay.
joined the photo club, and my parents gave me a very rudimentary single lens reflex camera, which did
Okay.
not have a through the lens meter. I used a handheld light meter
Okay.
and began reading and taking instructions. But a large part of what I really enjoyed was the darkroom work. And of
Okay. Okay.
course,
When
at
was
the
this?
time,
Which year?
probably about 1970,
Okay.
in
Wow.
that era.
Okay.
Shortly after Woodstock, my hair was down to my shoulders, and
Wow.
yeah, very interesting times. And so getting that hands-on tutelage in how to do darkroom work and process your film, and to think of it now, the contrast now, Saurabh, is so dramatic. I use two different Nikon bodies, a D800 and a D4, and I know we'll go through that a bit later on. But at that time, and I still have some of the film, you know, you used Triax, which had an ISO, I think, of 300, which is why it was called Triax. And you could push that in the darkroom through your developing process, and you might be able to get 1,000 ISO out of it. But that would be really pushing it, and the grain would be phenomenal in that. But then you could do different tricks with the film as well. You could put it in warm water and then dunk it into cold water, and so you sort of melted the emulsion and then solidified it very quickly, and you permanently reticulated that particular piece of film. But you would come up with these interesting different types of techniques. And it's, you know, I find it fascinating now when you hear some of the dialogue and some of the debate around the use of Photoshop and criticism of people that will over Photoshop their images. We did all sorts of stuff in the darkroom. So
Absolutely.
An image did not look like reality, because reality to your eye is very different than reality to what a camera can capture.
Right.
And also, you know, when I do teaching, I talk about the different forms of photography. And for me, I realize that my form that I really want to pursue is fine art photography. So I'm not interested in photojournalism. I'm not interested in an exact representation necessarily of what is being seen. I want to develop that into an art form. And so there's always going to be a bit of processing, and it goes way back to that early training that I had in the darkroom. So that's a long, you probably weren't even born at that time, Sarah.
Yes, I was about to say that. Yeah. So how do you feel transitioning from that time to having working with digital cameras? How was the transition from film to digital?
Well, it was obviously a long transition, but a lot happened in between because my background is in clinical neurophysiology. So I'm not a photographer. I'm a very keen amateur. I've never portrayed myself as a professional photographer. And I also had a family. And so the intervening years between high school and then being in university, I did have to do darkroom work in university when I was doing cardiac electrophysiology, and had to develop images of what I was seeing through a microscope. So that continued, but it was very practical. And of course, in that instance, there was no enhancement to images. You had to portray exactly what you saw from a scientific perspective. So then many, many years intervened when I had a family and was pursuing a career. And it's really only in the last probably about 7 or 8 years that I really began to get into photography as a fine art form. And transitioning from film to digital occurred in a very unnatural way when I was climbing up a waterfall area in upstate New York in the US, and I fell, and I had all my gear with me, and I fell into a pool of water. And of course, everything was ruined. And so I had to start over, and I thought at that time, and I was going to be a holdout, you know, I was going to be one of these guys that said, oh, I'm going to stick with film and continue with film because I'm a traditionalist. And well, I made the change at that point because I had to buy a new camera, and I felt that trying digital was probably the right way to go. So I was a bit of a holdout. I could not imagine going back to film now. I wouldn't want to, first of all, I wouldn't want to be immersing my hands in those chemicals all the time. And being in a dark room for hours and hours and hours. And just, I use Lightroom and Photoshop as my editing tools predominantly. And the range of possibilities that you have are just phenomenal. So it would be like going back to writing with a chisel and a stone tablet compared to using a computer for word processing.
Right.
Not going to happen.
So previously you used Lightroom, darkroom, now you use Lightroom. So
very astute observation. Yes, I prefer to be in the light.
And so you said you do all genres of photography. So you do pretty much everything that interests you.
Well, there are three main genres. So wildlife, obviously, you see a lot of that. I enjoy landscape a lot, and those are very, very different in your staging, in how you're going to set up, in the equipment that you use. And I also enjoy travel photography. And when I say travel photography, so I love traveling and I love mountain hiking, and that's very it's a huge contraindication to using a 500 millimeter prime lens that weighs 8.5 pounds, a couple of kilos, because it's
Right.
too large to carry in many instances and do mountain hiking.
Right.
So when
Right.
I'm doing
Right.
travel, what I really like to focus on is street photography. And of course, that's what
Okay.
led me to you, introduced me to you and going to the Pushkar Fair. And it's something that I had known about for a couple of years and was looking for an opportunity and looking for a guide and a mentor, somebody who would be able to sort of elevate what I wanted to achieve out of street photography in a place like the Pushkar Fair. So my three main genres then would be wildlife, landscape, and street photography. And there's
Okay.
no connection between those three genres,
Yeah. And how
other
was
than
it?
I like them.
And how was it shooting in the Himalayas?
Well, again, shooting in the Himalayas is it's wonderful. I go there for hiking, but I
Hmm.
also want to achieve some images. So I do carry gear with me. It becomes
Okay.
more difficult because for landscape photography, you really should be using a sturdy tripod. And again,
Hmm.
that's not something I'm going to carry when I'm trekking for anywhere from 5 to 15 days in the mountains. It's just not practical. And the
Right.
same thing with cameras. Typically, I travel with both camera bodies and up to 5 lenses. You've got to pare that down and be practical when you're doing something like mountain trekking and choose
Right.
the right lenses for what you're going to try to achieve. I did acquire a very light 300 prime lens fairly recently, and that was
Hmm.
a bit of a game changer because you can put a 1.4 teleconverter on it. You get
Okay.
420 millimeters, and it doesn't break your back. But
Right.
hiking in the Himalaya, I will go back almost as soon as this pandemic subsides and we can travel again. Who
Yeah.
knows, Sarah? We may be doing a trip again.
Sure. Absolutely. All right. So how is your typical workflow like, Bruce? So suppose you want to go to a place. How do you do your research, and how do you go about when you're going to a new place?
Okay. So it'll depend upon which one of the three genres I'm trying to achieve. So if it's
Okay.
wildlife, and I do
Yeah.
that predominantly in my local environments,
Right.
um, the first thing I need to do is have an understanding of where the subject either might be or has already been identified, or I have found it and I'm going back for another time.
Okay.
You need to have an understanding of the behavior of the
Mm-hmm.
animal that you're interested in, and
Okay.
that includes the times that they're active and
Mm-hmm.
the times that you might be able to find them. And so if you look at something like a fox, and I've been trying to get fox kits lately, the young foxes, they can be active through the day, but the parent, the mother typically, is a nighttime hunter, and she'll come back to the den in the early morning. So you need to be up basically at dawn and getting in a position where you're going to be able to see them without scaring them. And that's
Mm-hmm.
a huge factor in wildlife photography, is you being in their environment as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to landscape where you're still in an environment that isn't yours, but the chance of you upsetting that environment is much less than it is with
Right.
wildlife photography. So probably not too different from street photography, where you don't want to be inserting yourself in the photo at all.
Right.
And
Right.
that's one of the key elements. So I'll research the animal, figure out where I'm likely going to see it,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll start to plan my journey, because it often involves a bit of travel, and I'll do overnight trips as well to give me a
Mm-hmm.
better opportunity. If I can't find the animal, if I go in a daytime and I'm doing just a day trip and traveling for a couple of hours, it means I'm getting up exceptionally early in the dark, traveling the distance, hoping to find the animal. And if I don't, then I've got the long journey home with nothing. So sometimes I'll stay over so that I have that second opportunity if I haven't
Okay.
been successful in the first day, because so much of this is your goal is to get that particular photograph, and the investment in time for me, because I don't work any longer, the investment in time is not a cost factor. And so I can afford to put a lot more of that in, and then just add a little bit more cost by having accommodations, try to reduce cost by bringing my own food, that sort of thing. Once I get there, you're looking for the species that you're interested in, and you're
Mm-hmm.
going hopefully with the right equipment. So the one owl that we're going to show in a couple of minutes is an interesting example, because in that case, I knew the owl had been found in a particular location that was about a 2-hour drive from my house on the
Okay.
other side of Montreal. I had to drive through Montreal, which is a relatively large city, and get there and then get into the woods and try, if there was nobody there, try to find this tiny little owl in this massive trees. And the owl is not active during the day. It's a nighttime hunter. And
Okay.
so I had decided, I went down once and I found it. But what I found when I went, and I went on a beautiful day, great for driving, but it was a sunny day. And so the owl is covered in shadows from branches. And you
Okay.
can't get rid of those really. So I felt that my images were not really good because they just looked like an amateur owl photo in poor light with tons of shadows. Nothing
Mm-hmm.
and when I look at images, when I look at an image, what grabs my attention is going to be the visual impact.
Right.
And
Right.
I want to look at it again. A good image, I'm going to look at it again, and I'm going to look at it for a period of time. I might come back a couple of times. I'm going to try to understand the design elements. I'm going to look at the
Right.
environmental context, have an understanding of how the photographer captured it. And that's what I want people to do with my photographs as well. So
Right.
an image like that. So in this particular case, I realized that the better situation is going to be to go during a snowstorm. So I knew
Wow.
that there was also a large number of people that had found this owl. People had been flying up from Washington, D.C. into Quebec trying to photograph this owl. It had garnered a lot of attention because it was quite rare to have one of these in our area along the St. Lawrence River.
Okay. Okay.
And I didn't want crowds around. The first time I went, there was about 12 people. That's too many for me. So
Mm-hmm.
I asked a couple of people if they were interested in going during a snowstorm, and it was like, no, it's going to be snowing. I said, perfect. So I went twice in heavy snowstorms, and the one in the picture that I sent you, there was one other photographer sitting there, and he's all dressed in camouflage outfit, and he's sitting in the snow, and there's the owl on a low perch. It was only probably half a meter off the ground. So, and the other thing I don't like doing is shooting up for a bird.
Right.
It's the
Right.
wrong angle. Eye level.
Right. Right.
Every animal should be at eye level pretty well, unless it's a bird in
Right.
flight.
Mm-hmm.
So there it is, half a meter off the ground. And it was exactly as I had hoped for. One other
Okay.
person, and the owl is completely covered in snow because it's
Wow.
asleep. And the
Mm.
snow is falling all around us. Our gear is getting completely drenched by snow. I did have a rain cover for my lens, but in
Mm-hmm.
that particular day, I didn't walk in with a 500 millimeter prime because I wanted to find the owl first. And I was going to go back and get my big lens and tripod once I found the owl. Well, I found it fairly quickly, and I've only got the 300 prime with a teleconverter, and that's what I took the shots with. And because I knew if I went back to, walk back a couple of kilometers to get my big lens, I risked the
Mm.
chance of the bird leaving or doing something. And I got it exactly the way I wanted, asleep,
Wow.
covered in snow, in a great big snowstorm.
Wow.
And so it has visual impact. There's no shadows. And it's
Mm.
interesting that it was so contrary for some people to think of deliberately going in the middle of a snowstorm to photograph an owl.
Sounds
But
crazy.
it's a wintertime bird. That's the right environment. So it's trying to have that understanding of how to develop that sort of fine art image of wildlife show and using the environment as a context to illustrate it.
Right. So you said it was exactly the way you imagined. So do you pre-visualize you before you going you think this is how I want this shot? So is that something like that?
Yes, absolutely. Again, I said I don't want the shooting a bird from the underneath. I have many what I call ash shots. Birds flying away from me. Yes, I visualize what I'm trying to achieve. If I can get close to that, I will keep shooting and I will stay there. The longest I've ever stood waiting for an animal to change position so I could photograph it was 6 hours in one location, and
Wow.
literally moved very little from that one spot, waiting for a great gray owl to move from a perch that was too far away and in an
Wow.
area that was inaccessible. And it eventually moved at near dusk, flew to a nearby perch, dove into the snow, came up with a vole, landed on an eye level branch, and proceeded to eat the vole right in front of me. And all of that was pretty well the ideal, the visualization of what the type of photograph I wanted. So you're going to see another example. I've sent you a couple of owls actually eating voles. And to me, that they're dramatic shots. Some people look at them and kind of go, yuck, I don't like that. But we eat, and owls need to consume, and that is what their meal consists of. And so again, that's a very natural type of photograph. It's not what somebody might
Right.
want to put on their wall,
Right.
but it still it represents, and that's how I visualize a lot of what I'm looking for as a final outcome in my photos. So
Right.
once I get the picture, then it's back home. My workflow, as you have some inside knowledge, lacks a little bit in the post-production. And I have to admit, Saurabh, I'm not quite there, having followed the recommendations you gave me when we were together in India. I'm getting
Okay.
closer, my friend. I'm getting closer. Again, having time on my side is an advantage that I can spend. Now, it doesn't take me a long time to process an image once I get it. I just posted to Instagram an American kestrel, which is a beautiful bird. And interestingly, that was one of my goals for this year, was to get a kestrel not on a wire. They typically will perch on wires along roadsides.
Right. Right.
And this one is on an old weathered dead branch. And with a kestrel, all the color is in the back. So his
Wow.
back is towards me, and his head is turned, and I've got a catch light in one eye, and his beak is sharp.
Wow.
Very,
Wow.
very clear. That was visualization. So with that image, I brought it into Lightroom. I did very minor adjustments in Lightroom because I'm trying to do the best I can with the image that I'm capturing and do the minimal amount of changes. Little bit of level adjustments in Lightroom, and then I bring it into Photoshop. I spend a lot more time in Photoshop with an image than I will in Lightroom. And I will use as many as 5 layers on an image.
Okay. Okay.
So with that image of the kestrel, what I did was to use a layer to lighten one portion of one wing. I used
Okay.
another layer just to bring out the luminance in the head.
Okay. We'll talk about that when we actually
Okay.
see the picture, I think.
Right. So then spend a lot of time in Photoshop, and then post them to social media. And if somebody says, "Hey, I like this," that's great. If not, I'm not terribly worried. I'm not somebody who, I don't buy friends and I don't buy likes. You either like it or you don't. I won't lose any sleep over somebody saying, "Yeah, whatever."
I think that's the attitude which we all should have, because nowadays, people get upset when you don't get like, probably. In fact, it has happened to me so many times, some pictures which I thought were very good, I didn't get any likes, so it upsets me. So what's wrong? But yeah, I think I have to get there. Very good. So what inspires you, Bruce?
Well, my original degree was in biology. So as a biologist, and I've always spent a lot of time out in nature. I grew up in the country, spent a lot of time under my father's, we'll call it guidance, doing his gardening for him. And so just a lot of opportunity to be outdoors. And I've continued that. When I was doing my biology degree, although I specialized in physiology, I still spent a lot of time camping and fishing and hiking. And that's always been a big part of my life. So nature and landscapes, and again, as a biologist, I'm amazed at evolution. And when I look at different species, and whether it's a clear-wing moth to a phenomenal raptor to a lizard, it doesn't matter what it is, to think of the millions of years that it took for that animal to develop into its current form, and how there were biological pressures, food pressures predominantly, that got that animal into its shape. It just absolutely amazes me. And that is very, very inspiring for me. To look at landscapes. The first time I was in Nepal, I was there during the massive earthquake in 2015. And to think I was in Kathmandu, and the place that I was standing in Kathmandu was actually raised by 1 meter during that earthquake. It's phenomenal to think about an entire city being raised, and there were changes at Mount Everest. So when I look at a mountain range like that, to think again of the upheaval that occurred underneath the Earth's crust to create those mountains, phenomenal natural powers. And it really makes me realize, and this was something I experienced a lot, and I worked in Canada's far north for one summer on a fisheries project. And there were, you could look in any direction, and you knew that for thousands and thousands of kilometers, there was not one other person. And it made you realize how insignificant you are.
Right.
Not in a negative way, but we're here for a very, very short period of time in the grand scheme of things. And our influence, although humans have had an absolutely dreadful impact on the planet, especially
True.
over the last 50 years more than anything, 50 to
Right.
75 years.
Right.
A lot of what inspires me is that natural world. But as I traveled, I also found that I was inspired by cultures that are different than mine and life experiences that are different than mine. And
Right.
so my first, when I was working, I presented often in different countries around the world, presented at scientific conferences, and I got to see, to some degree, different parts of the world. But really, Nepal was my first eye opener to see how vastly different that part of the world was than anything I
Right.
had experienced before, and how wonderful the people were. Like, just absolutely amazing people.
Right. Right.
Friendly and generous and kind. And, here's
Absolutely.
this stranger, I'm 6 feet tall in Imperial, so relatively tall compared to the population. And people would come
Right.
up to me and they wanted their picture with me, or young kids handed me flowers, like just totally inspiring. And so that's how I began street photography.
Mm-hmm.
So each one had a different, I'll go back to evolution. Each one of my genres had a different evolution in my life experiences.
Right. So how do you keep learning? So I mean, especially when you shifted from film to digital, it was, I mean, different world. So understanding Photoshop and other things. So how do you keep upgrading yourself, learning? What is source of your information?
A number of different sources, actually. I do have a number of books, and actually, I had just dragged this one out. So this is a mag book. Get it in front of the camera. I have quite a number of
Okay.
these, and I find them useful because as my learning style is not great from, if I were to use YouTube as an example to use learning, I really have to have two computers running because I have to be hands-on. But I will use, YouTube. I'm using books, and I'm using friends and mentors. So I have a large group of friends who are photographers as well, predominantly
Okay.
wildlife photographers, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm often having conversations with them, or they'll provide critique on my work,
Okay.
and that's helpful. As you know, I had done a Pushkar Fair with you, Sarb. I've done a number of tours like that as well, and try to capitalize on the tremendous knowledge that people like yourself have that can help improve whether it's my workflow or whether it's the composition. I also look at design elements a lot. And so I have read about design elements and
Right.
try to figure out, as I'm doing, especially in my post-production, how I can
Mm-hmm.
best take the image that I've captured and incorporate design elements into that. So
Right.
it's a constant process of learning,
Mm-hmm.
refining. I've gone back to images that I processed a number of years ago, and I've brought them now into Lightroom and Photoshop again and tried newer techniques that I've learned since I first did that processing. And all of a sudden, I have a different image. So it is an ongoing process,
Right. Right.
but it has to match your learning style. And
Absolutely.
if it doesn't match your learning style, for me in particular, then it's not going to stick. It's not going to work.
Right. Right.
And it's that practice, the hands-on.
Mm-hmm. Right. So once you come back from a trip, what is your workflow like? So how do you put them onto the computer, and how do you cull your images? How do you choose the best ones?
Well, my workflow, even before I come back, so I do back up when I'm in the field.
Mm-hmm.
So I travel with multiple cards, and because I have two different camera bodies, they use two different format cards. So I do have duplicates of that. I also
Okay.
carry a computer with me, and I have an
Mm.
external hard drive.
Okay.
So typically every night at the end of my day after I'm done shooting, I will
Mm-hmm.
back up onto the computer and then from the computer onto the external hard drive. I will try not to take anything off a card until I'm home. So when I
Okay.
travel home, I've got 3 different sources of images, and they're stored in 3 different places.
Right.
So I've got redundancy. Once I get home, and of course I'm only going to use one source, the source that's on my laptop computer, and that's most often what I'm processing with, even though it's got a relatively small screen and I don't have a slave monitor attached to it, which I really should. I will go through them with 2 different ways. I'll either use a Windows-based viewer, or I will use, and the name is going to escape me yet, the icon's right in front of me. Fast browser, fast viewer.
Okay.
And just go quickly through them. I won't tag them necessarily at that point in time with a star. All I'm doing is my first look. Those that I know are like the outstanding ones, then I will try to move into a different folder.
Okay.
Once I import them then with Lightroom, I have different folders set up based on what the subject matter is, and I'll
Okay.
put them as a raw image into that folder. And then once I begin my processing, I've got a second copy that will be saved in there with the processing done, but I always have the original raw version, completely untouched. I can always go back to that.
Right.
And once I've done the Lightroom processing, then again, I'm into the Photoshop, and I'll save it. Once I'm done with my Photoshop, I do save it as a TIFF file, and then I'll put my watermark on it, and I'll save it as a low-res JPEG.
Okay. So, have you done any exhibition of your pictures anytime? Do you wish to?
I have.
You have a body of work.
I have. I had done there was a buddy of mine in Ottawa who used to have a setup with a local coffee shop where photographers could display their wares or talents, and the coffee shop would help sell them and take the money in and then provide you with the funds.
Okay.
In that situation, I didn't actually sell any. It was more of a marketplace. I have done a solo exhibit in a local town, which is nearby, and it was a fundraiser for our local hospice. And of 17 images I put up, I had sold 9 in the first day.
Wow.
So I was very pleased with that. But I think the inspiration was more the fundraising for hospice than it was Bruce Kennedy's images. But it was still pleasing to see all these people come in and, chat about it. And some of them were photographers, and some were the staff, and, relatives, of course. My dearly loved ones came in as well, and kind of nice to get that feedback.
Great. Yeah, I think it's a different experience when people see your pictures in print in big size, and it's a great feeling, I feel.
Well, in different media too. I've used Canvas. I do have a large format printer myself, so I can print large format.
Wow.
But then doing any sort of framing becomes very, very expensive.
Right.
I've printed on acrylic as well,
Okay.
the plastic. I've not done any printing on metal yet, and I can't do that on my own. It depends on the image, and what I've learned through that process is that some images just don't do well on canvas. And I do have a different range of papers that I use depending upon the image that I'm processing. If it's a street portrait, I might use a textured paper, for example. For landscapes, I'll tend to want to use a luster type paper. And it's interesting to talk to people who do some enlargements. A lot of people don't pay any attention at all to the type of paper they're using. And it really is one more aspect of your final image that will have a tremendous impact on what it looks like, what the visual appeal is going to be.
True. Absolutely. Great. So thank you, Bruce, for answering the questions that I had. So we'll go through your pictures, and I think that's the most exciting part for me, to go through your pictures, and then maybe you can tell us a little bit about the situation, how you did those pictures.
Okay.
Shall we?
Let's go.
Great. Right. Can you see the screen?
Yes, I can. So this is a barred owl, which would be a medium-sized owl, and is fairly common around here.
Okay.
And this was taken in the winter. You can't tell that from the image. And this is one where I actually spent about 4 hours with this owl. And when I first found it, it was perched quite high in a tree, sleeping. It's more of a nocturnal hunter. And I waited and waited, and there were a couple of other photographers that came, and they aimed their cameras up into the tree and took a couple of shots and wandered off. And it was relatively cold. It was probably about -10 Celsius on the day that I took this shot.
Wow.
And the owl eventually woke up and he flew to a different perch. And there was only one other photographer remaining with me. And a gentleman who is quite a well-known birder was in the area. And he stopped
Okay.
to have a quick chat. And a little while later, this barred owl flew down to a perch that was almost eye level, the one that he's on
Wow.
right now.
Right. Right.
And I thought, this is amazing. And I had my long lens set up on a tripod, and I was taking some photos, thinking how lucky I was. And all of a sudden, he launched directly at me. And
Wow.
my lens was so long that I couldn't get him at all in focus in flight. And he landed
Okay.
in front of me about 1 meter away from my feet and
Wow.
pounced down in the snow. And there's a very typical pattern, physical pattern that owls use once they pounce on their prey under the snow. And they can hear the voles digging under the snow. And that's the large facial disc on this owl. You can see it's got this round look to his face. That
Right.
helps bring sound into his two ears, then helps to localize where the vole is. And so when they jump down, they can't see their prey at all. It's under the snow, but they typically will land right on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it did in this case. And so it spread its wings out on top of the snow. And as it's a meter away from me, it turned and it looked right up at me. And it was too close. I couldn't even get my camera, my lens to focus on it. And I interpreted that look as him questioning whether or not I was going to try to steal his food. And I think the wings are spread out not to try to keep the vole in place, because the vole is already in his talons, in very, very sharp talons. The wings are spread out to hide that he has just caught a vole, to keep any other owl or any other bird, or me in this case, from trying to steal that meal. So in this particular case, he flew back to this branch and he began to devour the vole right in front of him, right in front of me. And my D4, Nikon D4 shoots at 12 frames a second, and I just
Right.
kept clicking. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And here I like the representation of this one because of the emotion involved. So that's actually something else that I would like to talk about just briefly, around how you have emotion in a photograph or not. But in this one, he's looking right at me. He's got the vole clutched in his talons,
Yeah.
and he's
Yeah.
looking right at me. And the look to me just said, am I safe to eat this, or are you going to try to come and take it away from me? And
Yeah.
he
That sounds
eventually
bad.
did. And the vole was alive in his talons. And in the series of shots I took, because it's 12 frames a second, you can actually see the vole wiggling, because he hadn't yet killed it. And he kills it by pinching the back of the neck with his beak. And so he
Okay.
did that, tore off the head, and he ate most of the body, gulping it down without tearing apart. And so my latter images actually are with the hind end and the feet and the tail sticking out of his beak.
Wow.
When I've shown that picture to some, I've been asked a couple of times to go and present at schools, and when I showed that picture to the kids, they really had a reaction to it. So in terms of emotion, when I talk to people about photography, if I'm doing any mentoring, one of the things that I try to make sure they understand is that an image may mean more to them because of the emotion that they had
Right.
at the time the image was taken.
Absolutely.
And I try to take that out of every image, because it will never mean as much to anybody else as it did to me.
Right.
And so,
Right.
so you need to convey an image that here I feel as though there's an emotion because the animal is looking right at me. So with
Right.
that emotional connection between the two of us, it's not my emotion in, obviously I was exceptionally pleased to be able to capture this.
Right.
And it's not the first time I've been able to capture an owl that's eating a meal, but I was very, very pleased because the light was just perfect. There are no shadows. Again, it was an overcast day, which is really not a bad day to shoot owls. But yeah, there's an emotional feel to it. He's
right.
probably just afraid of me. That's his emotion.
Yeah, and the placement of the, yeah, is so beautiful. I mean, the prey, so I mean, just perfect.
Well, you raise another very good point. So when I'm processing images, I will use a format that is going to suit the image in most cases.
Mhm.
For owls, and you see it's in a portrait format. Sometimes I will use a square format. Sometimes it
Mm.
just works. I'm a big believer in the rule of thirds,
Okay.
especially for animals that are looking in a sideways direction, or for landscapes, or for
Oh.
people.
Mhm.
In this case, because it's staring right at me, a portrait format or a square format was much better suited. And there's nothing in the extremity. And I talk to people a lot if I'm helping somebody edit a photograph, or if I'm critiquing something, I look for that, what I call noise
Mm.
in around your subject. I talk a lot about subjects. So
Right.
here there is one main subject, which is the owl. The secondary subject is the vole. It had to be clearly. You could describe the branch they're standing on as a third subject line, but there's nothing else around this owl that would ever contribute to the subject. Unlike the other owl that we're going to talk about, where the environment does become part of the subject. So here, going in close to the owl in a square format made the most sense for visual appeal.
Right.
And that's the
Right.
ultimate goal, right? Is that visual impact.
Absolutely. So moving to the next one. Yeah.
Well, vastly different. This is not too far from my house, and it's a place I've been to many times, and it's a waterfall that has many stages. And it's called the fourth chute, and chute in French would be the rapids. This is the middle set of rapids, and there's another set to my right, to the right of the image, where the water is flowing downstream, that is quite large. But I felt that this one, I went specifically, again, I had a goal in mind. This was in autumn, and I was expecting more color to the leaves, but I was a little bit too late. And as you can see here, some of the trees in the background have lost their leaves.
Right.
So I took a series of images, and I think I probably used about it might have been a 5-second exposure on this. So I had a variable ND filter on, neutral density filter, so that I could slow things down. I wanted full depth of field, so I was probably at f22. Wide angle lens. I'm fairly close to the rock that you can see that is closest to me.
Right.
And what I wanted to represent here, and it came out quite well in the final processing, was the passage of time.
Right. Right.
And again, when you look at this river has been created after the glaciers swept across North America, receded. This river was created over millions of years of time. And here I
Right.
am. I'm taking a picture and I'm talking about a 5-second exposure. Like, it's very dramatic in terms of a representation of time.
Right. Right.
But the flow of water really does represent that. First of all, as it's cascading down the slight rapid in the more further background of the image, but also then as it sweeps by me. And I like the way that it sweeps into the corner of the frame. And I
Right.
find that that works best. I had different, I had set myself up in different positions, so I had a slightly different composition, but I like this one the best, to have the water flow out of the frame right in that lower right-hand corner. So a diagonal movement
Right.
taking place here. Strong foreground object, and that's the rock on the left in the
Right.
foreground that has a bit lighter texture to it, a lighter tone to it, and strong texture to the one right beside it. And again, when I give lectures about photography, I talk about the elements of design that will help an image. Color is obviously one of them. Texture is another, and I find people don't use it enough, use it to their
Right.
advantage. When you're photographing architecture and old doors and old windows, the texture, you can make that texture work for you so exceptionally well. And here the texture
Absolutely.
work both in the harshness of those clouds. They're very foreboding. It's a dark scene. This is not a warm and welcoming scene, is it? So the emotion of this scene, not my emotion in capturing it, but the emotion of the scene is this: there's a bit of mystery about it, and you wonder where the water's coming from, where the water's going to, the whole environment. It's almost like an Edgar Allan Poe kind of poem, where you expect a raven to be flying around, and There's some mystery inside this image, and so that creates the emotion that draws the person in. And in terms of the eye being drawn in, your eye just goes, for me anyway, from the ribbon of water in the lower right, your eye just gets sucked right up to where that waterfall is. Totally
Very
drawn.
nice. Right. Okay, so
And I used the rule of thirds there, as you can see.
yeah,
Yeah,
beautiful.
and that's important, I find, because my
True.
subject here is the river. My
Right.
primary subject. The rocks are the secondary subject. The sky would be the tertiary subject.
Right. Very nice. Okay. Wow. This is one of my most favorite picture of yours.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Actually, a woman saw this on, I don't know whether it was Facebook or Instagram, a woman who lives in Wyoming in the US, and sent me a message and asked if she could buy a copy of this. So I'm not a professional. I don't really sell my photographs, but I did send her one. Yeah, this is the owl where I had decided to go down in the snowstorm, and this is different for me because it's with my 300 prime. It was the D800, which only shoots 4 frames a second. It's not an action shot, so I didn't need a fast burst like the 12 frames per second of the D4. And I sat down in the snow. I wanted to be eye level. And remember, this guy's sitting on a branch. Typically, he would be at eye level, like he would be 2 meters off the ground, or he might be a little bit higher than that. And the day that I found him in this snowstorm, he was only that half meter off the ground. So I had to sit in the snow. No two ways about it. And it's so important, I saw other photographers that would be later on, there were some others that came in and they shot down on this bird and it would look, well, I shouldn't criticize their work. It's not something I would do. Always go for the eye level. And so here I also wanted to incorporate, there was a bit more to the frame when I took the photo. So I did a little bit of cropping. I wanted to leave enough of the tree on the left so that it completely covered the left-hand edge of the frame. I didn't want to have anything in the background showing on the left-hand side because that would be a huge distraction. There are no branches cloned out here, which I will do in other images. And I
Okay.
also wanted to make sure that I caught as much of the snow falling as possible. But there is a story here, Saurabh, of a failure. And it's one, again, I went with a vision and I didn't get it because I made a critical mistake. So you see this guy, how wonderful he looks. And it's interesting, the pattern of feathers mimics snow. It looks like snow on his body. Now, obviously, he does have a lot of snow on his body. He has a lot of snow on his head. He is sound asleep. The fact that the other photographer and I are nearby him doesn't bother him at all. They're not terribly bothered by human interaction. But we didn't wake him up because he's a nighttime hunter. And in order to have minimal impact, leave the owls sleep because that is the time they need to regenerate. These guys do catch, as they catch more voles and mice, if they catch more than they need in a day, they'll stash them. They'll make a cache. And the cache will be in different areas and different trees. So this guy's resting. He's obviously had enough to eat. The snow is cascading on him. He eventually did wake up. And my real vision, besides an image like this, was to get him with his head full of snow when he would shake his head to
Wow,
get
that
rid
would
of the
have been
snow.
awesome.
And the snow just goes out horizontally from the top of his head.
Wow. Wow.
So he didn't do that here. And I wasn't ready anyway, because I didn't, for that, you'd really need a tripod. And you just have your camera trained on them and you're ready to go, and preferably be using a remote control so that as soon as you see, and the more you study them, you can see the behavior. So I knew that his shoulders would go up right before he would shake his head. So if I saw his shoulders go up, all I had to do was to hit the shutter release and start firing away at 12 frames a second. So after he moved to a different perch, I had gone back to my car. I had my D4. I had the 500 millimeter, the big tripod. I'm trained on him. I am so ready, Saurabh. This is going to be the best image I ever captured. Snow is cascading down. It's building up on his head. I'm so ready for this. And my phone rings. And I'm in the middle of the bush, and I've been gone for most of the day, and I'm not expecting any calls. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I wonder if there's something wrong at home. So I reach down into my coat and I take out my phone and I look at it, and it's a toll-free number
Oh
from
my
a
God.
telemarketer. And I look back up, and the owl had already shaken his head when I was looking at my phone. The image was gone. And that was it. I didn't get it. I didn't get it this year. And these owls probably would be in our area maybe once every 10 to 15 years.
Oh my God. Oh.
Yeah. So you can imagine how much I was kicking myself for looking at my phone and missing the shot. Full confession there, Saurabh.
Oh, thanks for sharing this, Bruce. I think I mean most people don't share things like this, but thank you for being so open and sharing things like this. It's a great learning for everybody, actually. Thank you.
Well, I hope I learned from it, buddy.
So, do you still carry your phone when you go out?
I do, and it's always on vibrate, so I never want an animal to hear it ring. Um, in a situation like this, when I knew I had a limited period of time, no, he could have stayed like that for an hour, but it wouldn't matter to me. It would just be more and more snow buildup.
Right.
But once I missed it, and then he flew on to a different perch after that. And the first time I had seen that behavior was, you're going to see another image of this same owl when he's got a vole in his talons. That was where I first observed it, and I watched carefully to see what his behavior was like. And I had a better understanding of what I should be watching for as a trigger to know when he's going to do this movement, shake his head, and get rid of the snow. I will get one. It's still a goal.
I'm
It
sure.
may not be a boreal owl, but I will find one.
Great.
Yes. So this is the same owl. It's a
Okay.
different day. And again, I went on a day when it had been snowing. And again, there was only one other photographer there.
Okay.
And the other photographer had found the owl before I did. And it was
So,
sleeping.
Bruce, sorry to interrupt. So, how do you know it's the same owl?
Because again, it's so rare. And this is a boreal owl. And there was only one in this particular area along the St. Lawrence River. Now, interestingly, there were 3 owls in the same area. The boreal owl is a relatively small owl. It would be about the size, well, it would be about maybe 2 fists.
Wow.
And there was another owl nearby, which is called a saw-whet owl. And it's even smaller. And I did eventually photograph it. I don't know if I sent you one of those. And there was a much larger owl called the great horned owl. And the great horned owl would actually eat both of these 2 smaller owls. And so these small owls tended to stay in very, very thick brush, where the great horned owl would be, the body would be too large for it to fly in and try to nab them when they're sleeping.
Okay. Wow.
But this became the famous boreal owl that people were coming from. They drove up from Boston. They flew up from Washington, D.C. It became a bit of a celebrity. And of course, when I go trying to photograph owls, I don't want many people around me. I prefer to have nobody around me. Sometimes it's nice to be able to share the experience with 1 or 2 other photographers if they're people you know and they have the same ethos around shooting owls. But it was a guy I'd never met before, and we've since become friends. And I'm in Quebec, and quite a number of people in this area don't speak English. And so I was struggling with my very rudimentary French. This particular guy beside me was an English teacher, so we got along well. When we found the owl, he was sitting on this particular perch, and he actually had this vole clutched in his talons, and he was sound asleep, but he was sitting on the vole. And that indicated that he had taken this vole out of his cache, and the vole was frozen, and he's sitting on it to thaw it out before he eats it. And again, he was covered in snow, and I have images where he's facing directly towards me, and you can just see a little bit of the vole. And he woke up at one point, not because we had disturbed him. They do wake up during the day, and they'll shake the snow off, and they'll check to see whether or not the vole is ready to eat or not. So he must not have been successful in hunting the night before. It was clear that this was a frozen vole. And he sat on the perch, and he turned his side to us, And once he turned and looked at us with those great big yellow eyes, like it was just, that was the golden opportunity. And to have the vole hanging down like that so clearly. And again, I
Absolutely.
think his thought process is, are you going to steal my food? Is that the problem here?
So here again, as you were saying, the emotions of the owl you can see very clearly.
Yes. And again, I used the tree. So I cropped this image as well. It's a portrait format. I cropped this image so I have, you can see in the background, there's quite a number of branches. Like it
Right.
is super thick with branches in here. We had to weave our way in. And when I'm going in with my 500mm lens and a tripod, I'm struggling to get in there. So with this one, I cropped it again where I wanted the tree to occupy the entire right-hand edge because I don't want anything to draw your eye over in that direction. And the tree
Right.
doesn't do that. The only thing that draws your eye is the primary subject, which is the owl with the eyes, and the secondary subject, which is the vole. For me, that's all I see in this image. Everything else blends away. Now, there probably were a couple of small branches in the background that would have been out of focus because I was probably using about an f8 on this because you don't want those branches in focus. It's very important to have a relatively narrow depth of field, enough to get the bird. You want the eyes sharply in focus. You would like to have the rest of the head, but you don't want any of those branches if possible. I think
Right.
in this particular one, I did clone a couple of branches out that would have been in a position like a 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock position in this particular image because they were distracting. It doesn't change anything. And that's one of the arguments around to Photoshop or to not Photoshop. Some purists would say, well, you shouldn't have done that because, really those branches were there when you took the picture. And that would be great if it was a scientific representation of an owl in the wild, but it's
Right.
not.
Right.
It's fine art.
That's right. Agree.
And it's
And
my image, and I get to define what that fine art is.
right. Absolutely. And Bruce, typically how much would you walk with your 500mm lens around when you're going for a shoot like this?
Oh, I can walk with that on my shoulder. I do have a shoulder strap that I will use. It goes so not around the neck, but it's a harness that will go over my shoulder, which helps reduce the weight. But typically, my camera and lens are attached to the tripod with a gimbal head, and that is placed over my shoulder here. And that's how I walk. And my left shoulder is much stronger than my right shoulder for carrying that weight. But I can walk many, many kilometers and many hours in a day. That's
So
the
we had a
price of
friend.
getting this.
No, sorry, please continue.
That's just the price of trying to capture these animals, and it's part of your workflow. If you don't do that, you can do yard birds in your yard, and you can get some great shots in your yard. But for me, when I wanted this particular very rare species of owl, I had to drive and I had to walk and I had to sit in the snow.
So we had a friend who actually had a surgery done because he does the same, and he did quite a bit of walking, and then there was some problem.
You're giving me a warning. I'll use the strap as much as I can, but if I do that, then I've got to disconnect the strap from the camera to get the camera into the gimbal head. And I have missed shots because of that.
I know. Okay, so now this is again something very different.
Yes, completely different. So I did a tour with a guy out of the States by the name of Dean Totolis a couple of years ago. Actually, I went to Nepal with him the first time, and then I did a tour with him in Morocco. And we
Okay.
basically circumnavigated Morocco. And I had, again, an idea. And of course, with Dean's tutelage and mentorship, knew these are hired herders and camels that we rented to go up in the sand dunes at dawn, specifically to get this image. These are models, all of them.
Right.
And I can tell you it is not easy to direct models
I
who are
know.
walking across the dunes, who tend to walk in a particular pattern and pay no attention to what you're trying to tell them. I'm referring to the camels. The guys were great. So we knew
I know.
we had scoped out an area in an area of Morocco, it would be the southeast of Morocco, around Merzouga, where these high sand dunes exist. And we staked out a position. We had the camels all lined up. They're actually dromedaries, and the 2 herders. And we knew we had to have 5, because if you had 4, it would look funny. 3 is too many. You want an odd number. 3 is too few. The problem with these dromedaries is that they like to walk very close together. And in a silhouette like this, if you can't get them separated, it looks as though one's got his head up the other's butt. And that doesn't make for a great photograph. So we had to keep reshooting and reshooting. I preferred them traveling from left to right rather than right to left. I wanted to convey motion, so I wanted the herders to have their arms swinging. I wanted some sand kicked up, and I was using f/22 to get that sunburst as the sun is split by the horizon. And I wanted a nice, you see that nice gentle curve in the sand. I wanted that sort of sigma curve. And I wanted them right at the base of that, so they were just starting to go up. So this is probably one of maybe 250 images, but it is the one that I like the best. Very little processing done to this. It's almost as shot.
I can make one. And we do this similar things in Jaisalmer, in Rajasthan.
Okay. And always with an odd number of camels, I assume.
Right. Yes, that's right. Wow.
So this was a lucky shot. This was, I had done a trip not too far from here to we have a provincial park called Algonquin Park, which is the oldest provincial park in Ontario. Ontario is a fairly large province, and this park is quite large. And I actually went in June to photograph moose, which is a very large animal here in Ontario. And in June, the moose will tend to come out of the bush because they are absolutely attacked by biting insects. And so they'll go into at the edge of the lakes, they'll go into the water. And so I'd gone to photograph moose, and the first night we stayed in this lodge on a lake, and then we were in canoes, and we had to do multiple portages to go from lake to lake to lake to get to a destination where the moose were undisturbed by people. And I get up at dawn in the morning. We were heading out quite early, and I knew there was a dock at this little lodge that we were staying at, and the air was so unbelievably still that morning. There was mist rising off the lake, and it's at dawn. There was a little bit of cloud cover, thin cloud cover that hadn't burned off yet by the sun. And this is, in Canadian culture, this would be called a Voyager style canoe. And the Voyagers were French Canadians who were some of the first European settlers in Canada, and they were used extensively as laborers, hired laborers, to paddle canoes going from river to river as the fur traders moved further and further inland in Canada. And they would load these canoes up with beaver pelts and then float them downstream, and the beaver pelts would be shipped to Europe for clothing. So it's very iconically Canadian, and it's sitting beside a dock. The design element here, there's really 3 of them that I see that I look at and incorporated here. So you've got the parallel lines of the dock.
Right.
You've got a vanishing point, which would be the end of the dock, and the canoe is pointed towards the vanishing point, which is somewhere in the trees on the opposite shore. You've got a complete reflection of that opposite shore because there is not one breath of wind. If there had been any wind, the water would have been rippling, and this shot, you wouldn't even be seeing this shot. And the third design element, again, is the use of the rule of thirds, because my main subject here, to me, really is the canoe, as iconically Canadian. The dock and then the horizon would be your tertiary subject. So this, I printed this in large format on canvas a couple of times, and it's an absolutely stunning image on metallic finish canvas.
I can imagine.
It hangs in my son's and daughter-in-law, their house, which is a log house, and it looks really stunning on those bare logs inside their house.
Wow.
But a lucky shot. I went there for moose, and I didn't get any good moose shots, but I got a great canoe shot.
So one of my friends says the nature never disappoints.
Yeah. Always use your imagination and always be ready. I often talk about that with people. You know, a great shot is often it's opportunity meeting preparation,
Mhm.
or preparation meeting opportunity. That was the case in this particular shot too. This was a shot taken with my very good friend Ray Barlow, who is a great mentor for me and teacher. And we've done a couple of trips together, actually more than a couple at this point. And we'd gone to a place about an hour east of my house. We knew there were great gray owls, and this is the largest owl in North America. Has a wingspan of about 2 meters.
Two
Very, very
meter.
large.
Wow.
2 meters.
Yes.
And we went to an area. I don't believe in baiting any animals to get them closer to you or to get them into a position. I think that's wrong. And I'm very vocal about it. I've had a number of arguments with people over it who are baiters.
Wait, do people do that very often, Bruce?
Yes. Oh, yes. It's big business here,
Okay.
especially for owls in the wintertime. There are tour operators that will advertise. You can go with them for about, in Canadian dollars, it would be around $3,500 for 5 days. They'll take 6 to 8 guests out. They'll do this for 2 months, and in a 2 month period, they can easily earn $120,000. And so when you've got customers that have paid that much money, you've got to deliver, right? Well, the way you deliver is you go close to where you know there are owls, and you have live mice, and you throw the live mice out into the snow, and the owl comes right at you to get the mouse, and that's baiting.
Mm.
This owl is not baited. I actually went to a preserve where everybody had to stay on a given pathway. You couldn't go into the woods, you couldn't go into the fields, and it was patrolled. You were not allowed to bait. So I knew that everybody there was going to be behaving ethically. It was a bitterly cold day, absolutely brutally cold. It was probably about 15 below, with a
Okay.
strong wind in our face. And there were two great gray owls, and one of them was hunting quite a bit. And this guy's wings are clipped because he flew right at me, and I couldn't. I had a zoom lens at that time, 200 to 500, and I couldn't ratchet the lens back fast enough to keep him in focus. Now, if anybody who's listening to this has ever tried to photograph owls in flight, it is difficult. You need to practice, 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 or be exceptionally lucky. And it's even 10 times harder when they're flying directly at you. Your focus point is just constantly changing at the speed of flight. So this guy came in, he actually landed within probably 2 meters of me on a very small stick. And you're going to see that image too if we have time. But I was able to capture this guy in flight. And the fact that I didn't get his wings in didn't matter. So I processed the image showing those intense eyes looking. He has these amazing legs that hang down. So in spite of the fact he's got a wingspan of about 2 meters, he only weighs about a kilogram. So he's
Okay.
got a very tiny body all under all this great big pile of feathers, because he typically lives, he came here in the wintertime and he goes back up in northern Canada in the summertime. It's what would be referred to as a boreal owl. And so that's his insulating layer. But those
Okay.
legs that hang down, it looks as though he's got stockings on those legs. And just a wonderful image. And when you look at the pattern, and it makes you wonder, you see that massive facial disc, but it looks as though he's got a mustache. And it makes you
Yes.
wonder, right? What
Yes.
evolutionary pressure or advantage was there to that particular pattern and color? It
Right.
just
Right.
fascinates me. We'll never know the answer, probably,
Right.
but it's a wonderful
Good.
question. So this is, again, the same owl, and I do know it's the same, taken within probably 15 minutes. So this is when he flew up and he landed on this stick. So nobody put this stick in the snow. It was just there, and we couldn't believe. And there was a guy standing to my right who actually had a 500 prime, and he couldn't take one picture because he couldn't step off the path, and the owl was too close to him. So having
Okay.
the telephoto lens, I probably racked it back to around 300 or maybe 270 millimeters. And he sat on this stick and he just looked around. And it's hard to imagine this great big owl could balance on this tiny little stick that would be about the diameter of your index finger. But he did. And with this image, this has been my best selling image, actually, even though I don't really sell images. I've donated this to a couple of different charities, and they've made a fair amount of money from it. What I did in the processing of this one, there was some material in the background. There were some trees and you could see some grasses in the background. I cloned out everything. I didn't want anything in the background, and I completely desaturated the owl, but then I restored with an eyedropper tool, I restored the color to his eyes and to his beak. So
Okay.
again, this would not represent reality. This is a fine art photograph of a great gray owl. And it's been very popular with that two-tone color where you've got the yellow eyes and beak, and then the rest is in the grays and white.
Beautiful.
And it would
Right.
only work with me cloning out everything in the background. All of that had to go to white.
Absolutely.
Another great gray owl, I got this one quite recently. And again, these are quite rare. About every 5 years, we'll have what's called an eruption of great gray owls that'll come down, probably based on food supply and availability of food in their native area. When
Okay.
you come further south looking, or there could be a particularly large population, you know, a lot of eggs hatched and a lot of owlets survive to adulthood, and it's that balance between population and food source. So they come further south looking for food. This guy, I was out looking for a different owl actually in another area, and somebody texted me and said, the great gray owl is back on the place is called Old Elmont Road. And I happened to be about half an hour away. So I walked to my car, got in my car, went in the woods with a couple of other people, and we found it. And it was hunting. And it flew from perch to perch, but it was, again, thick in woods. But in front of me, it landed on the top of this dead tree. So I actually am shooting up a little bit here, and I haven't cloned anything out of this image. There just were no other branches because I'm shooting upwards sufficiently. And he landed again on this dead branch, which is very typical, or dead stump, I guess it is. And he's looking down, and the intensity of that look as he's locating, he's localizing with his facial disc,
Right.
trying to hear something under the snow over the click, click, clicks of, I think there were 4 of us taking photographs of this particular guy on this day. And as we were looking for him, I had been walking through, it was in the spring, I've been walking through deep, softer snow. And of course, I punched through the snow at one point and ended up in water up to my knees. And I was
Oh my.
wearing high boots, which filled up with water. I got the water out. It was freezing cold, and I stayed there for another 4 hours, soaking wet. I was not leaving this owl.
Wow.
And again, you look at the emotion. The emotion here is intensity.
Absolutely.
His thought process, he's just so focused on that singular point in the snow.
Right. Beautiful.
Well, this was another sort of stage shot. This is back in Morocco, and this is at a place called Essaouira,
Okay.
which is on the Atlantic coast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the European colonization process was by the Portuguese in this particular area. And this area was actually made a little bit famous by Jimi Hendrix, who was a musician who probably lived and died long before you were born. Very famous guitarist. And Jimi Hendrix went to Essaouira and stayed there. And one of the guys riding one of these horses, his name is Hendrix, ironically. We had gone there as we were touring around Morocco, and we had no notion that we were going to photograph horses. We thought we'd get some more dromedaries walking in the surf. And these 3 guys offered horseback rides, and they're very skilled horsemen. And we didn't want to ride, but asked, and I don't even think we asked. I think one of them galloped up the surf first, and all of a sudden the light went on. Oh my God, here's an opportunity, and talk about preparation meeting opportunity. So it's sunset, it's the golden hour.
Right.
You can just see the sun has just gone below the horizon. There's a 200-year-old fort in the background on that island. And so we paid these guys to ride up and down the surf for us. And I chose this image, and it's in a longer format. I think it's around 20 by 9. It's a little bit longer than 16 by 9, which is your typical format for TVs and computer screens. But I chose this image because out of the 3 horses, there is only 1 foot touching the ground.
Right, I can see that. Beautiful.
So a
Yeah.
way to convey motion, even though they're perfectly still, they're captured in a moment in time, that motion is conveyed perfectly by all those hooves being off the soil. And for design elements, look at the reflections.
Right.
It couldn't have been better light for us to do this. And this was just a spontaneous moment. These guys were so happy. And through social media, there's a site in Morocco, a Morocco tourism site that has used this photo and posted it.
Wow. Great.
This is very close to my house, and it's I knew about these. These are rather rickety boathouses right on the shore of the St. Lawrence River. And the St. Lawrence River is a huge, huge river that flows from the Great Lakes, the central part of North America, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. And these
Okay.
boathouses used to look just dreadful. And somebody got the bright idea to paint them, each one individually, in a different color and
Okay.
paint the doors differently. I don't know who did it. And I knew about them. And in different conditions, they look all right. They don't look spectacular. And so I was waiting for perfect conditions. And for me, perfect conditions, you talked about having a vision. My vision was, again, to go down during a snowstorm and to photograph them before anybody got there. So there's a wharf here, and it's in a small village. And people love to go down here and walk, and they walk their dogs. And so if you had gone here 2 or 3 hours after I was there, you'd see all kinds of footprints in the snow, which would
Right.
ruin the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So I got up early in the snowstorm and I went down. Nobody had been there. I chose the vantage point. I composed the shot. What I wanted was the use of triangles on and using a vanishing point with
Right.
parallel lines. And I wanted that vanishing point and the parallel lines pointing to infinity. And it goes nowhere, right? It goes into oblivion in that heavy snowstorm. So that's the St. Lawrence River that you're looking at in the background, but you can't see it because of the snowstorm. And I think at this point it was more fog than snow. But I do know this day, the price of going down there so early, the roads had not yet been plowed, and I got stuck. My car got stuck in the snow. And there were other people walking out on some of the roads, and I called to them, and they helped push my car out so that I could get home. And I was
Oh,
so pleased with this image.
yeah,
But this is,
absolutely.
its use of triangles, its use of colors, its use of vanishing point, parallel
Right.
lines,
Right.
design elements.
Beautiful. Absolutely.
Well, this is familiar territory to you.
Yes.
So when I first landed in India, and I only had a week to spend in India, and my primary purpose for going to India was the Pushkar Fair. That was my goal, and I had already arranged to meet you there. But I spent a couple of days because you can't go to India and not go to Agra. And I arrived in India when the smog levels in New Delhi had become international news. And
Okay.
I live in a rural area, almost no pollution that you can detect, and I'm a non-smoker, so I was dying in New Delhi. And I
Mm.
managed to get to Agra right away in the middle of the night. And I connected with a photographer from Agra by the name of Harsh Agarwal, a good friend now. And Harsh and I went to the Taj Mahal a couple of times, a couple of mornings. And on one morning we went, we were a bit later in the morning. So we spent our time in the mosque, which is on the western
Mm.
flank of the Taj Mahal,
Right.
and went inside. And I'm an incredibly shy person. And you and I had this conversation when we were together in India. And that's a
Right.
real challenge for people who do like to do street photography, because how do you walk up to somebody and say, would you model for me, or would you mind if I took your photo? And I have struggled with that a lot. And I admired the way that you approached this tremendously, Saurabh, because you had such sensitivity in the way that you would do that and the engagement that you had with the subjects. This was a tourist, and Harsh went over and asked her, and she had on a very long flowing dress, which was actually perfect for this setup. Excuse me. And asked if she would pose and just walk across the entrance, this particular entrance to the mosque. And so I set up, I composed a shot. I wanted to have the minaret just inside the left-hand side of the arch. There was actually some construction going on at the base of that minaret, and I had to get a professional editor to edit that out for me. I didn't have the talent to do it. And it was well worth it. And so she walked across there, and she just happened to brush away a loose strand of hair from her face as I was taking this picture, which again added to it. It made her more of a mystery. And that's what to me is conveyed in this picture. It's the use of light to create that dark space, and this mysterious woman walking across this fabulous, unbelievable piece of architecture. And you'll wonder what the story is. And I still wonder what the story is because I have no idea who she is. I don't even have her name and email to send her a copy of this.
Beautiful.
And she gladly walked across, and I clicked away, and I saw her once more, and that was the end of it. I think I took 3 images of her, and this is one of 3.
Okay, beautiful.
A little bit of post-processing in this to make it a bit darker. But that's it. There was very little done. Well, I cloned a couple of people out of the background.
Okay.
And then for the scaffolding, as I say, I got the Pro.
Right. Great.
So my heritage, in large part, is Scottish. This is the most westerly part of the sort of mainland Scotland. It's on the Isle of Skye, and it's called Neast Point, and there is a tiny little lighthouse down there.
Oh.
And it's a very dramatic landscape at sunset. And I went with a phenomenal landscape photographer from the Isle of Skye by the name of Marcus McAdam. And if anybody's ever going to go to Skye, you've got to connect with this guy. And so one of the advantages that I find in going on photo tours or using guides is that it cuts down on, or it improves, let me phrase it this way, it improves the opportunity to get to the right place at the right time.
Right.
Going here in the morning or any other time of the day would have been a waste of time. So using somebody like Marcus, he can say this location is sunset, this location is sunrise. And it makes me very efficient in my use of limited resources. So here, this is actually an HDR image of 3. It was cloudy. There's a storm going by in the horizon, so I wanted to incorporate that storm. I wanted to have the dramatic look to the landscape, and that's what it looked like to my eye. But of course, a camera doesn't have the same processing power that your brain does. So creating an HDR image here made a lot of sense to bring out the drama without making it look artificial.
Right.
There was a telephone line that went down along that pathway, but I cloned it out as well because I found it to be distracting. And again, people can criticize me for removing something that's there in reality, but I will still sleep well tonight.
Oh.
So this is a 5-shot pan from Poon Hill in the central Himalaya. So first time I went to the Himalaya, I went to the east side. I did the Everest Base Camp Trail, and this time I did Poon Hill. And it was a hiking excursion. I did my photography in India, and I had my goals set for both Agra, Jaipur, and Pushkar, which I did with you 2 guys. Here it was hiking with some friends who are not photographers. So the challenge is, how do you try to capture some images without having your 3 friends leave you at the side of the trail? So we went to the top of Poon Hill. We got up at 4 in the morning, and we were actually the first people to arrive. And this was after we had hiked 3 days, our 3rd day of trekking. And we were at an elevation of about 3,200 meters. So not really too hard breathing, but it was, strenuous enough. I had a backpack on, and I took a tripod, and I think I only had 1 wide angle lens that I took with me, or maybe I took 2. I had an 18 to 35 and a 24-70. And we're above the cloud deck, the lower cloud deck, and this is at actually this one is at sunset. I went up twice in the same day, climbed the hill twice in the same day. This was at sunset, and the way the light hit those peaks was just amazing. So using a tripod allowed me to pan effectively and to bring them into Photoshop. I merged them before I did any photo processing, because you can't process and then try to merge. Won't work. You'll never get the same level of processing. You've got to do the merge first and then work on them.
Right.
And Photoshop does an amazing job of that merge.
And I like the clouds behind the peaks. It looks so much more dramatic. Beautiful.
And as you can tell from my landscape images, I don't like it in my life, but I do like it in the landscape images. Drama is very important. And the more drama that you can introduce to landscape images, I find the more it conveys that overwhelming wonder of what the world is really like, the Earth.
Right.
Oh, this gentleman. My beard is almost the same color as his, but his, he gets 100. I might be a 9 on a scale of 100. He's up there around 99. What an amazing beard. And, he's very traditionally dressed. Actually, you and I had separated at this point, and I think I was either with Mona or the other female photographer that we were with. And we were chatting with this guy, and he didn't speak any English. So fortunately, I had another photographer with me that could speak Punjabi, and asked him again that's an interesting point. For my portraits, typically I will get consent. I don't like snapping people's pictures without consent. And I worked in healthcare all my life. It's just part of what I did professionally, and I like to do it for street photography. So he agreed to have his portrait taken. Amazing look. You look at the lines in his face, weathered. He's been around the globe a few times. The way he wears the shirt that he's got on, so open, and that massive tuft of chest hair, which is the same color as his beard, the violet turban, like everything. And I also, for my street portraits, I don't like people looking at me generally. That's one of the ways that I like to photograph, is when they're looking at something else. So I'm not in the photo, right? I'm not part of that photo. And I crouch down here. Again, because I'm reasonably tall, often I'll crouch down for images so I don't get anything in the background. I wanted nothing in the background. Crouched down so I could just get the sky. And I cropped it at mid-chest because I felt that this is the image that I really want. I want to portray that face. The fact that he's looking off to his right means that I placed him slightly further right in the image. So I create a little bit of negative space in the direction that he's looking, which is exceptionally important. If you don't have that, you won't have balance in your photograph.
Right. Beautiful.
This was a girl that I photographed in south central Nepal, fairly close to the Indian border. And what was really important here, and I photographed her mother, and her mother was a great subject as well, and had consent again to photograph them. And you can see she's looking a little bit past me. She's not looking right in my eyes. She's not looking right in the lens. Right. And she lives in a house made of bamboo and mud. And it's a dirt floor. It's an earthen floor. And I think there might have been 3 rooms in this house, and there were 6 kids and the mother there. And the contrast to my growing up and my conditions when I was her age is absolutely startling. And it demonstrates the privilege that I have.
Right.
What was very important in this is the tentative look in her face. And she did smile. One of the other photographers that was with us has a photo of her smiling, but I wanted that tentative look. That was the emotional aspect that I wanted. But what is really important in this image that most people wouldn't understand is that those paint marks on the wall beside her and behind her, that represents prosperity, bringing prosperity into the house, that particular symbol. And that symbol is made by putting paint on, if I can get my hand in front of the camera, this part of your hand. And then you daub your hand onto the wall and it leaves that shape. And what really works with this photo is that she placed her hand, not by direction, she just placed it there on the door frame, and her hand is exactly the mirror image of that pattern on the wall, bringing prosperity into the house. And yet they have so little prosperity, and they were so kind and generous. So I certainly had an emotional reaction taking the photos that I took, and I took a lot of street portraits down in this part of central Nepal. But the emotion here is this tentativeness and the shyness and not having a lot, not having prosperity, and yet symbolism is to bring it to them.
Beautiful. This is one of my favorite pictures of yours from.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Well, this is one where I actually walked across the street in Jaipur. I was trying to photograph the Wind Palace. And it's a very imposing structure from the street. And of course, the street was filled with, you know, bloody tourists and were everywhere. And a busload had just disgorged a whole group of them. This girl was with her 2 kids, and she was selling necklaces across the street. And I loved her look, and I loved the color of the clothing that she had on. So I went over and asked her if she would stand in front of the Wind Palace so that I could use her as foreground and photograph the Wind Palace. And it was early enough, I could wait, and so there were no people walking between me and the Wind Palace, and I just had her. And I took a number of images, and they didn't do anything for me. And I took a couple of her, but I asked, and she didn't have her veil up, but I asked her to put her veil up. And she wanted me to take pictures of her kids, and you know, I did that, but they weren't really interesting. So I took her picture with her veil up, and I instructed her to look right at me. And this is one of the times when I gave instructions just the opposite. I wanted her to be looking not at me; she is looking right through me. And with that veil up, and I did a very close crop. I was tempted to, you can see on the right-hand edge, there's a little bit of the background showing just at the edge of her veil. And I was very tempted to crop that out, but I did decide to leave it. I may at some future point, but I zoomed right in on her face, and she is just absolutely gorgeous in that image. And as I say, she's looking right through me. And
Beautiful.
I did pay her, and typically that's what I will do as well. I pay models. I don't, because I'm getting something for it, and they should too. That's part of my ethics.
Right. And this veil actually makes it more mysterious. I really love it this way.
Absolutely. Wouldn't you just love to know what she's thinking, and you know what the interaction is going on, and what the context is, and you'll never know that just from looking at the image itself.
Right. Beautiful.
I've spoiled it now for you. Sorry. This was another guy. Now, I actually didn't have permission to take his picture, but he saw me and he knew I was doing it, and he didn't tell me to leave, but I had a moment in time to capture this guy. So this is on the street of Jaipur, and he's a street vendor, and you can see the metalware to his right, and he's just about to light a cigarette. And this is when I had a friend of mine say, "Your image is okay, but it certainly isn't great." And he introduced me to using luminosity masks and layers. And so I sent it to him. He's a portrait photographer, and he only does studio portraits. And he sent me some YouTube videos to look at and to learn how to do this. And it has been a game changer for me. Absolute game changer. So there's probably about 4 layers in this guy, where I've lightened up his clothing. I've darkened the background a little bit because he's the subject, right? But his clothing is a secondary subject. And he has this amazing look, very, I assume, traditional clothing for India, for a street vendor. His look again, and his beard, and his age, and his wisdom, and everything that he must have experienced. If I could sit with him for hours or days and listen to some of the stories that he could tell me, it would enrich my life so much. That's what I take out of this.
Okay, so
So this image, I think you were with me when I took this, if I'm not mistaken. Again, this was one with permission, but it was one where the permission was given by I assume her husband. So she's sitting down, and she's with what looks like a mother or mother-in-law and a young child, and they're at an encampment at the Pushkar Fair, and they're camel traders or vendors of some variety. And very interesting look about her. And she wanted the veil up on her own. And she had, again, that slight askance look. She's probably looking at the photographer who's standing to my left, because we were 3 or 4 in a row. But again, I think that photographer didn't kneel down or didn't crouch down the way I did. And again, I wanted to get her at eye level. And I wanted to get as much of the background out as possible. Her mother-in-law was in the foreground, waving her arms and talking away. And I had said that I was going to pay, but I wanted to get the images first. And she sat there, and I'm disappointed in the way the color has been represented by, it's not, and it may be a color balancing thing on my computer. The colors, when I look at it using my computer, are much more vibrant. And you would probably see that in your own images too. They've been muted somehow by transmission through social media and in sending the image to you. But her
Maybe.
clothing was just outstanding, absolutely outstanding. And that look on her face, again, full of mystery. I actually took the photo to show her the next day. And of course, I went through her husband and he demanded more money, which I refused to pay. And I just said, no, I'm just here to show you how well the image turned out. He wasn't particularly interested. And of course, for cultural reasons, she couldn't really interact with me.
Right. Okay. So what about this image?
Well, this is the Eastern Himalaya, and this is before the earthquake. And this is part of my climb, my trek up the Everest Base Camp Trail. And it was a tough climb. I wasn't in as good shape at that point in time. I was still working. And this is taken at around 4,000 meters. So air is a bit thinner. We're trudging uphill. And we ran into a very surprising snowstorm at the end of one afternoon. We stayed in a tea lodge that only had electricity through the use of solar panels. No electricity because no light. Next morning, get up, and there's this beautiful, intense blue sky. And this is at a little village called Tangbushi, where there is a very famous Buddhist monastery. And I walked with a couple of colleagues. Some people were staying in front of the monastery and photographing the monastery, and you had a view of Mount Everest from this location. And they were trying to see Mount Everest if the clouds would clear. And I walked with a couple of colleagues behind, and there was a little dead-end trail, and it ended where somebody had put up this string of prayer flags that seemed to go out to infinity. They seemed to go out into the middle of nowhere. And there was a massive drop. It was at least, it would have been in feet, 2,000 feet down to the village below in the valley, like a dramatic drop below. And so I framed it so that I had the prayer flags as my vanishing point, leading line off to a vanishing point in the mountains. But there are so many triangles at play in this image as well. When you look at the mountain peak, the triangle beneath the prayer flags, the pine tree that's triangle, the two mountain peaks are triangles. There are triangles everywhere. And triangles tend to be pleasing to the eye. And they're scattered throughout this image. But it's the intense blue sky, the white, those massive mountain peaks, and then way in the valley below, there is a little tiny village down there. And you wonder, how did I get there? I still wonder, how did I get there?
Great. So I think Bruce will have to stop here. I think we can go on and seeing your pictures. It's so amazing to see them, but I think we are already running a little bit out of time. So,
well, Saurabh, I wondered when we began how we were going to fill the time, but you're a great interviewer, and it's so wonderful to see you again.
I'm so glad that you could take out time and we were able to do this. We'll just take another 5 minutes to see if anybody has any question for you, and then we will end the session. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed the presentation and the way Bruce narrated all these things. It was so exciting, and that's what I was really looking forward to. So, if you have any questions, please type in the comments, and then I will ask them to Bruce, and then we'll close it off.
And Saurabh, as we're waiting for somebody to type something in, I certainly hope we have an opportunity to go somewhere again together.
Yes, I am looking forward to it. It's really very unfortunate. I've never stayed at home for this long, but yeah, it's good. I mean, I'm doing a lot of things which okay. So here we have a question from Sri Vijay. What do you do like most in India as a photographer?
Well, I can say this without hesitation. I had my answer before I even saw the entirety of the question. The people. I found both in India, and I was a little bit, I went to India alone, and it's the first time that I've gone to what I would call such a foreign country alone. Now, obviously I had guidance from you, Saurabh, at Pushkar and with Harsh when I was in Agra. but it's a little bit daunting to go with a lot of equipment, and I was going on for another 3 weeks to Nepal. What I found was the people were so amazingly friendly and helpful and cooperative, and just they were wonderful to be with. It didn't matter who it was, whether it was another photographer, whether it was a subject. There was just such an ease about it. And that's what I really enjoyed. And that, I found the same experience in Nepal, actually. Now, there, I could go on. There are many things I love about India, and I will be back again.
I'm looking forward to. Okay, so here.
You're on.
Okay, so Prakash sir. Okay, Divya is saying beautiful picture and very inspiring talks with lots of inside story and techniques. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome. Thank you for joining us.
And Ashok sir is saying great narration, Bruce. I enjoyed seeing your pictures.
Thank you.
Okay, and Suman, you
Oh,
might
my buddy
remember
Suman.
So Suman is saying, yeah, great conversation and narration was too good.
Suman and I were chatting just a couple of days ago, actually, Saurabh.
Oh, is it? Okay, good.
Yes.
Great. So we have a lot of, yeah, sorry, please go ahead, Bruce.
Suman and I have been talking about doing a trip up to Nagaland.
Oh, wow. I mean, yeah, those areas are really very interesting, very untouched, very, very untouched.
Interested?
Very. So Prakash sir is saying absolutely amazing images and the narration is a topping on the cake.
Oh, thank you so kindly.
So Devashish is saying great photos. Great. There are a lot of appreciation. I think Ishi is talking about when you missed that moment.
Oh, absolutely. I'm still kicking myself.
But I'm sure you will get that. Okay, so Firdaus sir is saying, which is a place in India you really like to photograph?
Well, we had talked earlier about doing your homework ahead of time. So Pushkar was part of my homework. I had seen a lot of images. I knew about it fairly well. I had done a lot of research on who to go with, and Saurabh, you were my choice. So Nagaland really speaks to me because of the cultural diversity there.
It is
And
amazing,
the
absolutely
opportunities.
amazing.
And it's close to the Himalaya, and I'm a mountain hiker. I love hiking in fantastic mountains. So it has that combination for me of, again, street photography and cultural aspects. And, I certainly will enjoy the food, I'm sure, Saurabh. Get to have some more fabulous yogurt.
Oh, yeah. The other day I was thinking about those samosas. Yeah. Before we end, let me tell the viewers about this incident. So we were in Pushkar and we were having the breakfast for the first time, and I offered Bruce a samosa. I said, "Yeah, I would love to have one." And then he finished, and then I just asked him as a formality that, "Would you like to have another one?" I said, "Yes, I would like to." And then. I was a little surprised, and then I asked him for the third time, "Would you like another one?" I said, "Yes." I said, I was a little worried about.
I didn't realize it was a formality.
So I mean, I was a little worried about your stomach because anybody comes from the West, and I'm a little scared about people. I mean, losing their health. So
I had my yogurt every day, and the best yogurt I ever had was that what you bought me right there in the Pushkar market. Fantastic.
We'll go there again.
Yeah, we will.
Right. Okay. So yeah, we are the last comment. So love to know how you apply design principles in your photographs. So do you at any point of time feel the same principles limit your imagination?
That's a really good question. It's an excellent question. I've had people talk to me about, especially the rule of thirds, because I do tend to use that a lot, and I find it very effective. But you saw an example here when I did not use it with the owl that had the vole. So I don't think I let it limit my imagination, because I will try to work an image to the point where it works, and I'm looking for that visual impact.
Right.
And if people tell me, and I've had recently somebody say, "Hey, you need to clone out some twigs from a photograph I took of a fox," I will take people's comments and try to work with them. I love critique that is constructive. So if people feel as though some of the design elements might have limited my imagination, I'd love to hear feedback. But I generally don't, because I will use the design elements that I feel work the best, and those that don't suit it, I don't use them. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. Great. So thank you so much, Bruce, for your time. It was great talking to you and reliving those moments that we spent together. And it was absolutely a visual delight to go through your pictures, especially the owl ones. I was really looking forward to hear stories from you on how you did them. Great.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed them, and I hope your wife got to listen in as well and not be just the tech
Yes,
in
she
the
was
background
sitting
on this.
right next to me. Yeah.
Excellent. Hi, Smita.
I think
Someday I'll meet you.
she was actually more excited than I was.
Great. So great to see you.
Okay, Bruce. Have a great day, and thank you once again. And I'm grateful to you for spending time with us. So thank you so much.
Cheers, Sarah. Bye now.
Bye bye.